The desert morning arrived cold and quiet, just like every other morning at the forward operating base. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood outside the operations tent, watching the sun climb over the rocky horizon. She held a metal cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm in her hands. The taste was bitter, but she drank it anyway. Sleep had been hard to find lately. Sarah was 29 years old, though the lines around her eyes made her look older. She had joined the military right out of college, driven by a sense of duty that her father had instilled in her. He had been a soldier too, decades ago in a different war. Now Sarah found herself in command of an Apache helicopter unit in a conflict that seemed to have no clear beginning or end. The base was a collection of tents, concrete barriers, and prefabricated buildings surrounded by sand and more sand. About 200 soldiers called this place home, though none of them wanted to be here. They were stationed in a remote region where enemy forces had been growing stronger each month. Intelligence reports showed increased activity, more weapons moving through the area, and bolder attacks on coalition forces. Sarah finished her coffee and walked toward the briefing room. Her boots crunched on the gravel path. Other soldiers passed her, offering tired salutes that she returned. Everyone looked exhausted. The heat during the day was unbearable, and the cold at night made it impossible to rest properly. But the real exhaustion came from the constant tension, the knowledge that danger could arrive at any moment. Inside the briefing room, her crew was already gathering. There was Lieutenant, her co-pilot and weapons officer, was 32, a quiet man from California who had flown more combat missions than anyone else in the unit. He had a wife and 2 daughters back home, and he kept their photo taped to his helmet. Then there was Chief Warrant Officer James, who maintained the helicopters. James could fix anything with an engine, and his skills had saved their lives more than once. The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Emma Parker, was setting up the projector, preparing to brief them on the day's mission. Sarah took her seat at the front of the room. The chairs were uncomfortable metal folding chairs that had seen better days. Maps covered the walls, marked with red circles and lines showing enemy positions and safe routes. The air conditioning unit hummed loudly in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the heat that seeped through the thin walls. Emma started the briefing. She clicked through satellite images on the screen, showing a road that cut through the desert about 50 miles north of their position. The road connected several small villages and was known to be used by enemy forces to move supplies and weapons. Intelligence had been monitoring the area for weeks, watching the patterns of movement. "We've identified a high-value convoy," Emma said, pointing at the screen. "Our sources indicate this convoy will be moving weapons and possibly senior enemy leaders. The route takes them through this valley here." She highlighted a section of the road that passed between 2 rocky ridges. "This is our best opportunity to intercept them." Sarah studied the images carefully. The terrain looked challenging. The valley was narrow, with high ground on both sides where enemy fighters could position anti-aircraft weapons. It was the kind of place where helicopters became vulnerable, where one well-placed shot could bring down an aircraft. "What's the timeline?" Sarah asked. "The convoy is expected to move at dawn tomorrow," Emma replied. "We estimate they'll reach the valley around 0600 hours, weather conditions should be clear with minimal wind." Leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the map. "What about enemy air defenses? That valley looks like a perfect place for an ambush." Emma nodded. "We know they have some shoulder-fired missiles in the area. Standard precautions apply. Stay high until you're ready to engage, then get in and out fast." The briefing continued for another hour. They discussed attack patterns, emergency procedures, and communication protocols. Sarah asked questions about every detail, making sure her crew understood the risks and the mission objectives. This wasn't going to be an easy operation, but it was necessary. The weapons in that convoy would be used against coalition forces, against her fellow soldiers. Stopping it could save lives. After the briefing ended, Sarah walked back to her quarters. The small room contained a narrow bed, a desk, and a locker for her personal belongings. She sat on the bed and opened the drawer of the bedside table. Inside was a letter from her mother, written on blue paper in careful handwriting. Sarah had read it so many times she knew it by heart, but she read it again anyway. Her mother wrote about the garden she was planting, about the neighbors and their small-town gossip, about how proud she was of her daughter. The letter ended with a simple plea: "Please come home safe." Sarah folded the letter carefully and put it back in the drawer. She wanted to write back to tell her mother that everything would be fine, but she couldn't make that promise. Not in this place. That evening, Sarah joined her crew in the mess hall for dinner. The food was the same as always, reheated meals in metal trays that all tasted vaguely the same. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the time spent together, the jokes shared, the sense of being part of something larger than yourself. Talked about his daughters, how the oldest one had started playing soccer and the youngest was learning to read. James told a story about a helicopter that had broken down in the middle of nowhere and how he'd fixed it using nothing but duct tape and determination. Everyone laughed, even though they'd heard the story before. In this place, laughter was precious. After dinner, Sarah did what she always did before a mission. She walked to the flight line where the helicopters sat in neat rows. The Apache was a formidable machine, all sharp angles and weapon systems. In the fatting light, it looked almost beautiful in its deadly efficiency. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the warm metal under her palm. "Talking to the aircraft again?" a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to find James walking up, carrying his toolbox. "Just making sure she's ready," Sarah said. "She's ready," James assured her. "I've checked every system twice. This bird will fly tomorrow like she's brand new." "I trust you," Sarah said, and she meant it. James had never let them down. They stood together in silence, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. The sky turned orange, then purple, then black. Stars began to appear, more stars than Sarah had ever seen before coming to this desert. There was something peaceful about the night sky, something that made the war seem far away, even though it was all around them. "You worried about tomorrow?" James asked. Sarah considered the question. "I'm always worried before a mission, but we've trained for this. We know what to do." "That convoy won't know what hit them," James said with a grim smile. Sarah didn't respond. She wasn't interested in bravado or tough talk. War wasn't about being tough. It was about doing your job, following your training, and trying to keep everyone alive. Tomorrow they would fly into danger, and all she could do was be as prepared as possible. She returned to her quarters late that night and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the base. Generators hummed. Soldiers talked in low voices as they passed by. Somewhere far away, she heard the thump of artillery fire. It was a constant reminder that the war never really stopped, never took a break. It just kept going, consuming days and lives without pause. Sarah thought about the mission, running through scenarios in her mind. She visualized the approach to the valley, the moment when they would spot the convoy, the sequence of actions needed to engage and destroy the target. She had done this hundreds of times in training, dozens of times in real combat. But each mission was different. Each one carried its own dangers and challenges. Finally, around 3 in the morning, Sarah gave up on sleep. She got dressed in her flight suit, a bulky one-piece garment covered in pockets and zippers. She strapped on her survival vest, checking each pocket to make sure everything was in place. Knife, radio, signal mirror, water purification tablets, first aid kit. These items could mean the difference between life and death if something went wrong and she had to eject over enemy territory. The pre-flight briefing was at 0400 hours. Sarah made her way to the operations center through the darkness. Other crew members were already there, drinking coffee and reviewing their notes. The atmosphere was tense but focused. Everyone knew what they had to do. The final briefing was shorter than the one the day before. Emma provided updated intelligence on the convoy's position and expected route. The weather forecast remained favorable. Command had approved the mission, and now it was just a matter of execution. Sarah and walked to their helicopter together. The ground crew had already completed their pre-flight checks, but Sarah always did her own inspection. She walked around the aircraft, checking the weapons systems, the engine cowlings, the rotor blades. Everything looked good. The Apache was armed with Hellfire missiles and a 30mm chain gun. It was designed to destroy armored vehicles, and that's exactly what it would do today. They climbed into the cockpit and began their checks. Sarah sat in the back seat where the pilot controlled the aircraft, sat in front where the weapons systems were located. The cockpit was cramped and filled with displays, switches, and controls. Sarah had spent so many hours in this seat that it felt like a second home, despite the discomfort. The engine whine filled the air as they powered up. The rotor blades began to turn, slowly at first, then faster and faster until they became a blur. Sarah could feel the vibration through her seat, the familiar sensation that meant the machine was alive and ready to fly. "Tower, this is Phantom 2-1, requesting clearance for takeoff," Sarah said into her radio. "Phantom 2-1, you are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting," the tower controller responded. Sarah pulled up on the collective and the helicopter lifted off the ground. They rose into the dark sky, leaving the base behind. Another Apache followed them, piloted by their wingman. 2 helicopters, 4 crew members heading into the unknown. The flight to the target area took 40 minutes. They flew low, following the contours of the terrain to avoid being detected by enemy radar. The landscape below was a featureless expanse of sand and rock, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah relied on her night vision goggles, which turned the world into shades of green. As they approached the valley, the sky began to lighten. Dawn was coming, which meant the convoy would be on the move soon. Sarah climbed to a higher altitude, positioning the helicopter on the south side of the valley where they would have a clear view of the road below. "I've got something," said, his voice calm but alert. "Multiple vehicles on the road heading north." Sarah looked at her display, which showed the same thing was seeing. The thermal imaging camera had picked up the heat signatures of vehicles. A lot of vehicles. Sarah counted them quickly. 47 vehicles in total, strung out along the road in a long column. This was bigger than intelligence had predicted. Much bigger. "Tower, this is Phantom 2-1. We have eyes on the convoy. Count is 47 vehicles. Requesting permission to engage," Sarah said into the radio. There was a pause. Sarah could imagine the officers in the operations center looking at each other, surprised by the size of the convoy. Then the response came. "Phantom 2-1, you are cleared to engage. Destroy the convoy." But before Sarah could respond, another voice cut in on the radio. It was a different frequency, a command channel that only senior officers used. The voice was sharp and authoritative. "Negative, Phantom 2-1. Hold your fire, do not engage. I repeat, do not engage that convoy." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She glanced at who was looking back at her with confusion in his eyes. What was happening? They had been given clearance to engage, and now someone was countermanding that order. "Command, this is Phantom 2-1. Please clarify. We were cleared to engage," Sarah said, keeping her voice professional despite her confusion. "Phantom 2-1, this is Colonel Davis from Division Command. That convoy is not to be engaged. Intelligence has determined it's being used to transport humanitarian supplies to civilians in the northern villages. You are ordered to break off and return to base immediately." Sarah stared at her display, watching the convoy crawl along the road. Humanitarian supplies? That didn't make sense. Everything in the briefing had indicated this was an enemy weapons convoy. The intelligence had been solid, backed up by multiple sources. "Sir, our intelligence indicated this was a hostile convoy transporting weapons," Sarah said carefully. "Your intelligence was incorrect, Captain. The convoy is under protection. It is not to be engaged under any circumstances. Do you understand?" Sarah felt anger building inside her, but she forced it down. You didn't argue with a colonel, especially not over the radio where everyone could hear. "Understood, sir. Breaking off now." She banked the helicopter away from the valley, heading back toward base. The other Apache followed. Below them, the convoy continued its journey, unaware of how close it had come to destruction. Or perhaps not close at all if Colonel Davis was right about it being humanitarian supplies. The flight back to base felt longer than the flight out. Sarah's mind raced with questions. Why had the intelligence been wrong? Or was it wrong? Colonel Davis had seemed very certain, but something about the situation didn't sit right with Sarah. The location, the timing, the size of the convoy, it all matched what intelligence had predicted for an enemy supply movement. When they landed back at base, Sarah barely waited for the rotors to stop before climbing out of the cockpit. She marched straight to the operations center, still wearing her helmet and survival vest. Emma was there, looking just as confused as Sarah felt. "What happened?" Emma asked. "We got word you were ordered to stand down." "Colonel Davis from Division Command says the convoy is carrying humanitarian supplies," Sarah said. "He says our intelligence was wrong." Emma's face showed surprise and then something else, doubt. "That doesn't match anything we had. Every source indicated enemy activity." "I need to see the intelligence file again," Sarah said. "All of it." They spent the next hour reviewing every piece of information they had on the convoy. The sources were good: intercepted communications, informant reports, satellite imagery showing weapons loading at the convoy's origin point. Everything pointed to this being an enemy supply convoy, not a humanitarian mission. "This doesn't make sense," said, joining them. Either our entire intelligence apparatus is completely broken, or someone made a bad call. Or someone didn't want us to hit that convoy for other reasons, James added quietly. Everyone looked at him. It was a serious accusation, suggesting that political considerations might have military necessity. But it wasn't unheard of. Wars were complicated, and sometimes decisions got made for reasons that had nothing to do with tactics or strategy. Sarah felt frustrated and helpless. She was a captain, a helicopter pilot. She didn't have the authority to question decisions made by colonels and generals. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that they had just let a valuable target slip through their fingers because someone in command had made a mistake or had other priorities. The day dragged on slowly after that. Sarah tried to focus on routine tasks, but her mind kept returning to the convoy. By evening, she had made a decision. She would write a report documenting her concerns and submit it through proper channels. It probably wouldn't change anything, but at least she would have done her duty. She was sitting at her desk working on the report when Emma burst into H. Sarah jumped up and followed Emma through the base. Other soldiers were rushing toward the operations center too, all with the same urgent expressions. Something had happened, something big. Inside the operations center, a crowd had gathered around the main display screen. The base commander, Lieutenant Colonel, stood at the front, his face grim. When he saw Sarah, he motioned for her to come forward. "Captain Mitchell, you need to see this," he said. The screen showed news footage from a local television station. The image was shaky, clearly shot on a handheld camera, but the content was unmistakable. The convoy that Sarah had been ordered not to engage had been attacked. Vehicles were burning, sending thick black smoke into the sky. Bodies lay on the ground. The reporter was speaking in Arabic, but a translator provided English subtitles. "A massive attack on a humanitarian convoy has left dozens dead." The convoy was transporting food and medical supplies to villages in the north when it was struck by what witnesses describe as a sustained assault. Local authorities say enemy forces are responsible for this atrocity. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. The convoy had been destroyed anyway, but not by coalition forces. Enemy fighters had done it, killing the very people the supplies were meant to help. If those had really been humanitarian supplies, then innocent people were dead because the convoy hadn't been properly protected. But if it had been an enemy convoy all along, then the news report was propaganda, a way to make coalition forces look bad by claiming civilians had been killed. "Sir, I don't understand," Sarah said to Lieutenant Colonel. "Is this real? Was it really a humanitarian convoy?" Rubbed his face with both hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "We don't know, Captain. Division Command insists it was humanitarian. But the news is reporting it was attacked by enemy forces, which makes no sense if the convoy belonged to them." "Unless the convoy was ours and they're lying," Emma said quietly. "Or unless there are multiple factions fighting each other and we're caught in the middle," added. Nodded slowly. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Washington is demanding answers, the press is asking questions, and we're sitting here with no clear picture of what actually happened." Sarah's mind was racing. "Sir, request permission to conduct aerial reconnaissance of the attack site. Maybe we can get some answers from what's left." Considered this for a moment. "Captain, Division has ordered us to stay clear of that area. The last thing we need is more confusion about who did what." "But, sir—" "I said, Captain," interrupted, his voice sharp. Then he softened slightly. "I understand your frustration, but right now we need to let intelligence sort this out. You did your job this morning. You followed orders. Whatever happened to that convoy isn't on you." Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew it would be pointless. She saluted and left the operations center, feeling angry and helpless. Outside, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. It looked like the world was on fire. That night, Sarah couldn't eat. She sat in the mess hall with an untouched tray of food in front of her, staring at nothing, and James sat with her, equally quiet. The whole base felt different now, like something had changed that couldn't be changed back. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if we'd engaged that convoy," finally said. "If it really was humanitarian supplies, we'd have killed innocent people. But if it was enemy weapons, we could have prevented them from being used against our troops." "Either way, someone was going to die," James said grimly. "That's the thing about war. There are no good choices, just less bad ones." Sarah stood up abruptly. "I'm going for a walk." She left the mess hall and wandered through the base aimlessly. Her feet carried her to the flight line, where the helicopters sat silent and dark. She climbed up onto the wing of her Apache and sat there, looking at the stars. A voice from below startled her. "Mind if I join you?" It was Lieutenant Colonel. Sarah scrambled to get down, but he waved her off. "Stay there, I'm coming up." He climbed onto the wing with surprising agility for a man in his 50s. They sat together in silence for a while, two soldiers trying to make sense of a senseless situation. "I've been doing this for 30 years, finally said. "Flew helicopters in 3 different wars, and I still don't understand half of what happens out here." "Sir, about the convoy." "You want to know if you made the right call," interrupted. "You want to know if following orders was the right thing to do." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Here's what I've learned," continued. "In combat, you make the best decision you can with the information you have. You follow orders from people who supposedly know more than you do, and then you live with the consequences, whatever they are. What you don't do is second-guess yourself into paralysis." "But what if the order was wrong?" Sarah asked. "Then it was wrong. But it was Colonel Davis's decision to make, not yours. You're a captain, a helicopter pilot. Your job is to fly the aircraft and execute the mission as ordered. The big strategic decisions get made by people with more stars on their shoulders and more information at their fingertips." "It doesn't feel like enough," Sarah admitted. "It never does," agreed. "But it has to be enough because the alternative is chaos. If every soldier started questioning every order, deciding for themselves what was right and wrong, we'd lose all unit cohesion. We'd be no better than a mob." They sat in silence again. Sarah understood what was saying intellectually, but emotionally it didn't help. She still felt responsible, still felt like she should have done something different. "Get some sleep, Captain," said, climbing down from the wing. "Tomorrow we'll know more about what happened. Until then, there's no point in torturing yourself." But sleep didn't come easily that night either. Sarah lay in bed, playing the mission over and over in her mind. She thought about the convoy crawling along that road, 47 vehicles carrying something that someone had wanted to protect. She thought about the attack that had come later, the burning vehicles, the bodies on the ground. The next morning brought new information, but it only made things more confusing. Intelligence had intercepted communications showing that enemy forces were claiming credit for attacking the convoy. But they were calling it a coalition convoy, saying they had struck a blow against the foreign invaders. Meanwhile, the local government was saying it had been a humanitarian convoy attacked by terrorists. And Coalition Command was saying nothing at all, refusing to comment while they investigated. "It's like everyone's lying about something," Emma said during the morning briefing. "Or everyone believes their own version of the truth." "Welcome to modern warfare," said bitterly, "where the fog of war isn't just about what you can see on the battlefield. It's about information, propaganda, and political agendas all mixed together until nobody knows what's real anymore." Sarah spent the day going through routine tasks, trying to keep herself busy. She ran training exercises with her crew, practiced emergency procedures, and did maintenance checks on the helicopter. Physical activity helped keep her mind occupied, even if it didn't provide any answers. 2 days later, a team of investigators arrived at the base. They were from division headquarters, sent to interview everyone involved in the convoy mission. Sarah was called in to give her statement, along with Emma and everyone else who had been part of the planning or execution. The interview room was a small office with a desk, 3 chairs, and a digital recorder. 2 investigators sat across from Sarah, both majors she didn't recognize. They asked her to describe the mission in detail, starting from the initial briefing. Sarah told them everything, leaving nothing out. She described the intelligence they had received, the flight to the target area, the moment they spotted the convoy, and the order to stand down from Colonel Davis. "What was your assessment of the convoy when you saw it?" one of the investigators asked. "It looked exactly like what we expected to see based on intelligence," Sarah answered. 47 vehicles moving in tactical formation on the predicted route at the predicted time. Everything matched. "Did you observe anything that suggested it might be a humanitarian convoy? UN markings, civilian vehicles, anything like that?" Sarah shook her head. "Negative. The vehicles appeared to be standard transport trucks, the kind commonly used for military logistics. But we were at altitude, and conditions were not ideal for detailed observation." "If you had engaged the convoy as originally planned, What would have been the outcome? Sarah met the investigator's eyes. Complete destruction. We had the firepower and the tactical advantage. The convoy would have been eliminated. Do you regret not engaging? It was a loaded question, and Sarah knew it. If she said yes, she was questioning orders. If she said no, she was implying she didn't care about potentially stopping enemy operations. She chose her words carefully. I regret that the situation is unclear. If that convoy was carrying weapons that will be used against coalition forces, then yes, I regret not stopping it. If it was truly humanitarian supplies, then I'm grateful we didn't engage. But right now, I don't know which it was, so I can't honestly say what I regret. The investigators seemed satisfied with that answer. They asked a few more questions about her communication with Colonel Davis and her return to base, then thanked her for her time and dismissed her. Sarah left the interview room feeling drained. She had told the truth, but she suspected the truth wouldn't be enough. In situations like this, someone always needed to be blamed. The question was whether it would be her, Colonel Davis, or someone else entirely. That afternoon, Sarah received word that Colonel Davis himself was coming to the base. He was flying in to meet with the investigation team and address the unit. Sarah wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or worried. Maybe Davis would finally explain what had really happened and why he had ordered them to stand down. The meeting was held in the base chapel, the only space large enough to hold everyone. Soldiers packed in, sitting on folding chairs or standing along the walls. Sarah sat near the front with her crew, waiting for Davis to arrive. When he walked in, Sarah was struck by how ordinary he looked. She had built him up in her mind as some kind of villain or fool, but he was just a middle-aged man in uniform, with gray at his temples and tired eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well either. He walked to the front of the room and faced the assembled soldiers. I know you all have questions, Davis began without preamble. I know there's been confusion and concern about the convoy incident. I'm here to provide what clarity I can. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. The situation was more complex than your initial intelligence suggested. We had received information from diplomatic channels that a humanitarian convoy would be moving through that area on that exact day. The information came from sources we considered credible, sources at the highest levels of the Allied government. At the same time, Davis continued, we had your tactical intelligence suggesting it was an enemy supply convoy. I had to make a decision about which information to trust. I chose to prioritize the diplomatic intelligence because the consequences of being wrong seemed catastrophic. If we had destroyed a humanitarian convoy, it would have been an international incident. It would have undermined our mission and put more soldiers at risk in the long run. Sarah listened carefully. It sounded reasonable when Davis explained it, but it still didn't answer the fundamental question of what the convoy actually was. So what was in the convoy? Someone shouted from the back of the room. Davis's expression darkened. We're still trying to determine that. The attack destroyed most of the vehicles and their contents. What we've been able to recover is inconclusive. Some humanitarian supplies, some military equipment, some items we can't identify. In other words, you don't know, another voice called out. That's correct, Davis admitted. We don't know for certain, and that ambiguity is what makes modern warfare so difficult. We operate in an environment where nothing is clear-cut, where allies and enemies sometimes look the same, where the right decision can turn out to be catastrophically wrong depending on information we don't have. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many soldiers as he could. I made the best decision I could with the information I had. If I was wrong, I'll take responsibility for that. But I want you all to understand that these decisions are never simple. They're never easy, and they're never made with complete information. What about the people who died in the attack? Asked, standing up. Whether they were enemy fighters or civilians, someone killed them. Who's responsible for that? Davis looked at with something like sympathy. The people who pulled the triggers are responsible, whether that was enemy forces, as they claim, or coalition forces that we don't know about, or some third party trying to stir up trouble. The investigation is ongoing. The meeting continued for another hour, with Davis answering questions as best he could. But Sarah could tell that most soldiers left feeling just as confused as when they'd arrived. There were no clear answers, no definitive explanations, just a murky situation that seemed to get more complicated the more you looked at it. After the meeting, Sarah found herself walking back to the flight line again. It had become her refuge, the place she went when she needed to think. The helicopters represented something simple and straightforward in a world that was neither. They flew where you told them to fly, fought when you told them to fight. No moral ambiguity, no political considerations, just physics and engineering. "You doing okay?" a voice asked. Sarah turned to find Emma walking up beside her. "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically, then corrected herself. "No, actually, I'm not fine. I feel like everything I thought I knew about this job has been turned upside down." "You mean the part where following orders is supposed to be simple?" Emma asked with a wry smile. "Yeah, that part." They walked together in silence for a while. Then Emma said, "Can I tell you something? Something I probably shouldn't tell you." Sarah looked at her curiously. "Okay." "I've been going through classified intelligence files, stuff that's above my pay grade but that I have access to because of my job," Emma said quietly. "And I found something interesting about that convoy." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What did you find?" "There were 2 convoys scheduled to move through that region on the same day," Emma said. "One was humanitarian, operated by an allied NGO. The other was enemy logistics, carrying weapons and ammunition. They were taking similar routes, departing within hours of each other." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "You're saying we might have been looking at the wrong convoy?" "I'm saying it's possible. The humanitarian convoy was supposed to take the northern road. The enemy convoy was supposed to take the southern road. But in that terrain, from our altitude, both roads look very similar. It's possible we were tracking the humanitarian convoy while thinking it was the enemy one." "But Colonel Davis said the diplomatic information indicated a humanitarian convoy on our route," Sarah protested. "Did he say diplomatic sources indicated a humanitarian convoy in the area?" Emma asked. "Those are 2 different things." Sarah's mind was racing. If Emma was right, then the whole situation made terrible sense. Coalition intelligence had been tracking an enemy convoy on the southern road. Diplomatic sources had known about a humanitarian convoy on the northern road. Colonel Davis, trying to reconcile conflicting information, had assumed they were the same convoy and ordered them not to engage. Meanwhile, the actual enemy convoy had slipped through undetected. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because you deserve to know," Emma said. "And because I think the investigation is going to bury this. It's easier to blame bad intelligence or fog of war than to admit that multiple levels of command screwed up the coordination." "We have to report this," Sarah said. "Report what? I accessed files I'm not supposed to see. Anything I say will be dismissed as speculation, and even if they believe me, what difference does it make? The convoy is destroyed either way. The only question is which convoy it was and who destroyed it." Sarah felt helpless again. Emma was right. Even with this information, there was nothing they could do. The wheels were already in motion, the investigation was proceeding, and the official story was being written. The truth, whatever it was, would probably never be known with certainty. Over the next week, the investigation concluded. The official report stated that there had been conflicting intelligence about the convoy's nature, that Colonel Davis had made a reasonable decision based on diplomatic information, and that the subsequent attack on the convoy remained under investigation with no definitive attribution. In other words, nobody was at fault, nobody was responsible, and nothing would change. Sarah read the report and wanted to throw it across the room, but instead she filed it away and went back to her duties, because that's what soldiers did. They followed orders, they executed missions, and they lived with the consequences. The base settled back into its normal routine: training exercises, maintenance checks, patrol flights. The convoy incident became just another story, another example of how complicated and confusing war could be. 3 weeks after the convoy incident, Sarah was sitting in the operations center reviewing maps for an upcoming patrol when Emma burst through the door. The intelligence officer's face was flushed, and she was carrying a folder marked with red classification stamps. "Sarah, you need to see this right now," Emma said, her voice urgent but quiet. She looked around to make sure no one else was listening. They moved to a corner of the room where they could talk privately. Emma opened the folder, revealing satellite photographs and what looked like intercepted communications transcripts. "Remember how I told you about the 2 convoys?" Emma began. "Well, I kept digging and I found something. The enemy convoy didn't just slip through, it was destroyed by us." Sarah's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Emma spread out the photographs on a table. They showed a stretch of desert road with burned-out vehicles scattered across it. This is from a drone reconnaissance flight 3 days after the convoy incident. Look at the location coordinates. Sarah studied the images, then checked the coordinates. Her breath caught in her throat. This was miles away from where the convoy she had observed had been destroyed. This was an entirely different location. There were 2 separate attacks, Emma explained, her words tumbling out quickly. The convoy you saw on the northern road was destroyed by someone. We still don't know who for certain. But there was a second convoy on the southern road, and it was engaged by a different Apache unit operating out of another base. Wait, another unit destroyed a convoy the same day? Sarah asked, trying to process this information. Not the same day. 2 days later, Emma corrected. The enemy convoy was delayed because of mechanical problems. By the time it moved, Division Command had already issued the stand-down order for all units. But this other unit, call sign Phantom 47, didn't get the message in time. They engaged and destroyed 47 vehicles. Sarah felt dizzy. 47 vehicles, the same number. Exactly the same number, Emma confirmed. That's what finally made me put it together. I thought it was too much of a coincidence. Sarah sat down heavily in a chair. So we were ordered not to engage a convoy that might have been humanitarian, might have been enemy. We'll never know because someone else destroyed it. Meanwhile, the actual enemy convoy that we were supposed to stop got destroyed anyway by accident because another unit didn't get the stand-down order in time. That's about the size of it, Emma said. Except here's the really interesting part. Phantom 47's action is being completely covered up. No investigation, no questions, no official report. It's like it never happened. Why would Command cover it up? Sarah asked, though she was already beginning to understand. Because it makes them look incompetent, Emma said bluntly. Think about it. They ordered you to stand down based on bad intelligence. Then they failed to communicate that stand-down order to all units. And the result was that the mission got accomplished anyway, but in a way that makes Command look like they have no idea what's going on. Which, frankly, they don't. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. This is insane. So the official story is that there was one convoy, we didn't engage it because of diplomatic concerns, and then it got destroyed by enemy forces. But the reality is there were 2 convoys, we missed one, another unit got the other one, and Command is covering up the whole mess. Pretty much, Emma agreed. And here's the worst part. Those 47 vehicles that Phantom 47 destroyed, they were loaded with weapons, heavy weapons, anti-tank missiles, explosives, ammunition. If that convoy had reached its destination, it would have armed enemy fighters for months. Phantom 47's pilot probably saved hundreds of coalition lives. Who is the pilot? Sarah asked. Emma hesitated. That's the other thing. She's being told to keep quiet about it. No medals, no recognition, just orders to never speak about the mission. Command is terrified that if the truth comes out, someone will ask questions about why you were ordered not to engage while another unit was allowed to proceed. Sarah stood up and paced back and forth. This is wrong, Emma. This whole thing is wrong. That pilot deserves credit for what she did, and we deserve to know the truth about what happened. I agree, Emma said quietly. But what are we going to do about it? I've already violated protocol by accessing these files. If I report this officially, I'll be court-martialed for unauthorized access to classified information. Then we need to find another way, Sarah said firmly. We need to find Phantom 47's pilot and hear her story directly. Over the next few days, Sarah and Emma worked carefully to piece together more information about the mysterious second convoy attack. They couldn't ask direct questions without raising suspicion, so they had to be subtle. Emma used her intelligence access to pull flight logs and mission reports. Sarah talked to other pilots, asking casual questions about recent combat operations. Finally, they identified the pilot. Her name was Captain Jennifer Hayes, and she was stationed at a base about 200 miles east of Sarah's location. Hayes was 27 years old, a skilled pilot with 3 years of combat experience. Her co-pilot and weapons officer was Lieutenant David Park, a quiet Korean-American from Seattle. Sarah managed to get herself assigned to a supply run that would take her near Hayes's base. It wasn't unusual for pilots to hitch rides on logistics flights, and nobody questioned her request. Came with her, sensing that something important was happening even though Sarah hadn't told him all the details yet. They landed at the eastern base just before noon. Sarah found Hayes in the mess hall, eating lunch alone. She was a small woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she had the kind of alert eyes that missed nothing. Sarah approached her table. "Captain Hayes, I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell. Can we talk?" Hayes looked up and Sarah saw recognition flicker in her eyes. "I know who you are," Hayes said quietly. "You're the pilot who was ordered to stand down from the convoy mission." "Can we go somewhere more private?" Sarah asked. Hayes nodded and led them to a small office that was currently empty. Once the door was closed, Sarah got straight to the point. "I know about your mission. The convoy you destroyed 2 days after I was ordered to stand down. I know command is covering it up." Hayes's face remained neutral, but Sarah could see tension in her shoulders. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please," Sarah said. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to understand what really happened. Too many things don't make sense." For a long moment, Hayes said nothing. Then she let out a long breath and seemed to deflate slightly. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "If command finds out we talked, we'll both be in trouble." "I'm already in trouble," Sarah said. "I flew a mission where I had perfect positioning on a high-value target, and I was ordered not to engage for reasons that still don't make sense. Then that target got destroyed anyway, and everyone pretends like my mission never happened. Meanwhile, somewhere else, another pilot did what I was supposed to do, and she's being told to keep quiet about it. I deserve to know the truth." Hayes studied Sarah's face, seeming to measure her sincerity. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll tell you what happened, but this conversation never happened, understand?" "Understood," Sarah agreed. Hayes sat down and began her story. "We got orders to engage a high-value convoy on the southern road. The intelligence was solid. Enemy logistics, weapons transport, high-priority target. We lifted off at dawn, just like a routine mission. Our communications officer was supposed to check in with division command before we engaged, but we had radio problems. Solar interference or equipment failure, we're still not sure." "So you never got the stand-down order," Sarah said. "Right, we proceeded to the target area, found the convoy exactly where intelligence said it would be, and engaged. 47 vehicles, all carrying military supplies. We destroyed them all with Hellfire missiles and the chain gun. It was textbook execution, perfect tactical operation." "What was in the vehicles?" asked, speaking for the first time. "Weapons," Hayes said firmly. "Anti-tank missiles, RPGs, ammunition crates, explosives. We stayed on station long enough to do battle damage assessment, and we got clear images of the cargo. There's no question it was an enemy supply convoy." "And then what happened?" Sarah prompted. "We returned to base and filed our mission report, expecting commendations," Hayes continued. "Instead, we got hauled into the commander's office and told that the mission was classified, that we were not to speak about it to anyone, and that there would be no official recognition of the engagement." "Did they explain why?" Sarah asked. Hayes shook her head. "Not really. They said it was a matter of operational security and political sensitivity. Reading between the lines, I think command realized they had screwed up the communications, and they didn't want anyone asking questions about why one unit got a stand-down order while another unit didn't." "But your mission was successful," pointed out. "You stopped weapons from reaching enemy fighters. That should be celebrated, not hidden." "Should be, but isn't," Hayes said bitterly. "David and I did our jobs perfectly. We followed our orders, engaged a legitimate target, and achieved complete mission success. And our reward is being told to pretend it never happened." Sarah felt anger building inside her. This is wrong on so many levels. Command made mistakes, and instead of owning up to them, they're covering them up and silencing the people who actually accomplished the mission. "Welcome to modern military bureaucracy," Hayes said with a sad smile. "The mission isn't always about fighting the enemy. Sometimes it's about managing perceptions and avoiding awkward questions." They talked for another hour, comparing notes about the 2 convoy missions. Hayes described the tactical details of her engagement, how she had approached from the east, using the rising sun to mask her approach, how the convoy had been completely unprepared for an air attack, how the vehicles had been packed so closely together that destroying a few had created a chain reaction that took out most of the rest. "It was almost too easy," Hayes admitted. "They had no air defense, no escorts, nothing. It was like they thought they were completely safe, that nobody would dare attack them." "Maybe they had been told they were protected," Sarah suggested. "Maybe they thought coalition forces wouldn't engage them." Hayes considered this. You mean because of the stand-down order, but we never got that order. Right, but whoever was protecting that convoy might not have known that, Sarah explained. If they had assurances from someone in coalition command that the convoy was safe, they wouldn't have taken defensive precautions. The implication hung in the air between them. If Sarah's theory was correct, it meant someone in coalition command had been communicating with enemy forces, either directly or through intermediaries. It meant the stand-down order might not have been about protecting humanitarian supplies at all, but about protecting enemy assets for reasons that had nothing to do with legitimate military strategy. That's a serious accusation, Hayes said quietly. You're talking about treason or corruption at high levels of command. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, Sarah said carefully. I'm just trying to understand how all the pieces fit together. Why was I ordered to stand down? Why were you sent in without updated orders? Why is your successful mission being covered up? Nothing makes sense unless there's something else going on that we're not being told about. Had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Sarah, if you're right about this, it's way above our pay grade. This is the kind of thing that should be investigated by military intelligence or even federal agencies. And reported through what channels? Sarah shot back. The same chain of command that's covering it up. We already know that's not going to work. So what are you suggesting? Hayes asked. That we go public, blow the whistle. Sarah didn't have an answer. She knew that in the military often ended up ruined, their careers destroyed, sometimes facing criminal charges for revealing classified information. Even if they were ultimately vindicated, the process was brutal and unforgiving. I don't know, Sarah admitted. But I can't just ignore this. Too many things are wrong. The official story doesn't match the facts. Pilots are being silenced for doing their jobs, and somewhere in the chain of command, decisions are being made that put soldiers at risk for reasons that have nothing to do with military necessity. They talked until late afternoon when Sarah and had to return to their base. Hayes walked them back to their helicopter. What are you going to do? Hayes asked Sarah. I'm going to keep digging, Sarah said. I'm going to find out the truth, whatever it takes. Be careful, Hayes warned. People who ask too many questions about things like this have a way of getting transferred to unpleasant assignments or finding themselves under investigation for minor infractions. I'll be careful, Sarah promised, but I won't back down. The flight back to her base gave Sarah time to think. She had more pieces of the puzzle now, but the picture they formed was disturbing. 2 convoys, one destroyed by unknown attackers, one destroyed by coalition forces. A stand-down order that didn't reach all units. A successful mission being covered up. And at the center of it all, Colonel Davis, who had insisted the convoy was humanitarian despite solid intelligence suggesting otherwise. When they landed, Sarah went straight to her quarters and pulled out a notebook. She began writing down everything she knew, creating a timeline of events, noting contradictions and questions that still needed answers. If she was going to pursue this, she needed to be organized and thorough. Over the next week, Sarah carefully gathered more information. She talked to other pilots who had flown missions in the area around the time of the convoy incidents. She reviewed flight logs and intelligence reports that were available to her. She even managed to get a copy of the official investigation report through channels, though it told her nothing she didn't already know. One evening, Emma came to her quarters with more news. I found something else, Emma said, closing the door behind her. Remember those intercepted communications about the convoy? I went back through the original intercepts, not the translated summaries we got in briefings, but the actual raw intelligence. And, Sarah prompted, the enemy forces didn't just claim they attacked a coalition convoy, Emma explained. They specifically mentioned that they were attacking a convoy that had been betrayed by its protectors. They said someone in coalition command had sold out the convoy's location and route. Sarah felt cold. That's evidence of insider information. Someone on our side gave them intelligence about the convoy. It's possible, Emma agreed cautiously. Or it could be propaganda trying to sow distrust in coalition ranks. You know how these things work. Both sides lie constantly, trying to gain psychological advantage. But what if it's true? Sarah asked. What if someone in command deliberately set up that convoy to be attacked? Then we're talking about something much worse than bureaucratic incompetence, Emma said grimly. We're talking about deliberate betrayal, and proving that would require evidence we don't have. Sarah knew Emma was right. They had suspicions, inconsistencies, and fragments of information that suggested something wrong was happening. But they didn't have proof, and without proof, any accusations they made would be dismissed or turned against them. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep again. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything she had learned. Somewhere in this mess was the truth, but reaching it seemed impossible. The military hierarchy protected its own, and officers at Colonel Davis's level had resources and connections that a captain could never match. But Sarah also knew she couldn't let this go. It wasn't just about the convoy anymore. It was about accountability, about making sure that soldiers weren't put at risk because of political games or corruption. It was about doing what was right, even when doing what was right was difficult and dangerous. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She requested a meeting with Lieutenant Colonel, her base commander, was surprised by the request but agreed to see her that afternoon. In his office, Sarah laid out everything she had learned. She told him about the two convoys, about Hayes's mission, about the contradictions in the official story. She showed him her notes, her timeline, the evidence she had gathered. Listened without interrupting, his face grave. When Sarah finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Captain Mitchell," he finally said, "what you're describing is potentially a very serious situation, but it's also potentially career suicide for everyone involved in investigating it." "I know that, sir," Sarah said. "But don't you think someone should investigate? Don't you think we owe it to the soldiers who might be put at risk if there's really corruption or incompetence at high levels of command?" Stood and walked to his window, looking out at the base. "I've served in the military for over 30 years, he said quietly. "I've seen good people destroyed for asking the wrong questions. I've seen investigations that were supposed to reveal truth turn into witch hunts that ruined innocent careers. I've seen corruption covered up and punished." He turned back to face Sarah. "I've also seen brave officers stand up for what's right, even when it cost them everything. Some of them are my heroes. Some of them are no longer in uniform because of their courage." "What are you saying, sir?" Sarah asked. "I'm saying I believe you," said. "I think something wrong happened with those convoys, and I think it's being covered up. But I'm also saying that if we pursue this, we need to be smart about it. We need to be thorough, documented, and we need to protect ourselves as much as possible." Sarah felt relief wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. "What do you suggest, sir?" "First, we need to document everything officially," said. "Write a detailed report of your concerns and observations, following proper format and procedures. Route it through me to Division Command, with copies kept for our records. That way, if anyone tries to claim later that we didn't follow proper channels, we'll have proof that we did." "And if Division Command buries the report?" Sarah asked. "Then we have evidence that we tried to work within the system," said. "And that evidence might be useful later if things escalate. But let's take this one step at a time. Write the report and we'll see how Command responds." Sarah spent the next 3 days writing the most detailed, carefully worded report of her career. She included every fact she had, every inconsistency she had identified, and every question that remained unanswered. She attached supporting documents, flight logs, and intelligence summaries. The final report was 30 pages long, and it laid out a compelling case that the official story of the convoy incident was incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. Reviewed the report, made a few suggestions for clarification, and then forwarded it to Division Command with his endorsement. Now all they could do was wait for a response. The response came 2 weeks later, and it wasn't what Sarah had hoped for. Division Command acknowledged receipt of the report and stated that the matters raised had been reviewed and found to be adequately addressed by the existing investigation. No further action would be taken. The report was classified and filed away, and Sarah was instructed not to discuss the matter further. It was a polite brush-off, exactly what Sarah had feared would happen. She sat in his office, reading the response letter, feeling defeated. "They're not going to do anything," she said flatly. "No, they're not," agreed. "At least not officially." "So that's it, we just give up." Leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sarah, I want you to listen to me carefully. What I'm about to tell you is not an order. It's advice from someone who's been doing this a lot longer than you have." Sarah nodded, waiting. "Sometimes the system fails," said. "Sometimes the people who are supposed to ensure justice and accountability protect themselves instead of doing what's right. When that happens, Good people have to make hard choices about what they're willing to risk to expose the truth. Are you saying I should go outside the chain of command? Sarah asked carefully. I'm saying that there are other ways to ensure the truth comes out, said. Congressional oversight committees, inspector general offices, investigative journalists. These channels exist for exactly this kind of situation. But using them is risky. You could face retaliation, career damage, even legal action if you're not careful about what information you share and how you share it. But you think I should do it, Sarah said. I think you should think very carefully about what you're willing to sacrifice for this, said. I believe your concerns are legitimate. I believe something wrong happened. But I also believe that fighting this fight will cost you, possibly more than you can imagine. Only you can decide if that cost is worth paying. Sarah left's office with a lot to think about. She spent the evening walking around the base, weighing her options. She could drop the matter, go back to being a regular helicopter pilot, fly her missions, and not ask uncomfortable questions. Her career would be safe, her future secure. Or she could push forward, knowing that doing so would make her enemies in the chain of command and might end her military career. But if she was right about what had happened, if there really was corruption or betrayal at high levels, then exposing it could prevent future disasters and save soldiers' lives. It wasn't an easy choice, but the more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized that she had already made her decision. She thought about her father, who had taught her that honor meant doing the right thing even when it was hard. She thought about all the soldiers who trusted their commanders to make good decisions and act in their best interests. She thought about Captain Hayes, silenced for doing her job well. And she thought about that convoy, 47 vehicles destroyed, and the truth about what happened still hidden in shadows. She pulled out her phone and began composing a carefully worded message to a military affairs journalist she had once met at a conference. She didn't reveal classified information, but she did indicate that she had concerns about a recent operation and suggested there were questions worth asking. Within 2 days, the journalist responded, expressing interest. They arranged a secure phone call, and Sarah told her story, carefully avoiding any information that would violate security protocols. The journalist was intrigued and said she would start asking questions through official channels, filing Freedom of Information requests, and reaching out to congressional staffers who oversaw military affairs. Sarah knew that once this process started, there would be no turning back. She had crossed a line, and command would know she had crossed it once the journalists' inquiries started landing on official desks. But she felt oddly calm about it. She had done the right thing, and whatever consequences came, she would face them. 3 weeks later, the first news article appeared. It was careful and fact-based, raising questions about convoy operations and communication failures without making specific accusations. But it cited unnamed sources within the military who had concerns about command decisions and subsequent cover-ups. Sarah was called into his office the day after the article appeared. His face was grim. "They know it was you," he said without preamble. "Or at least they strongly suspect. I got a call from Division this morning asking about your activities, your associations, whether you had been in contact with media." "What did you tell them?" Sarah asked. "I told them the truth, that you wrote a detailed report raising legitimate concerns, that Division chose not to act on those concerns, and that anything you did after that was your own decision," said. "I also told them that I support your right to raise concerns through appropriate channels." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," said. "This is just beginning. They're going to come after you, Sarah. They're going to look for any mistake you've ever made, any regulation you've ever bent, any reason they can find to question your judgment or credibility. You need to be prepared for that." "I am prepared," Sarah said, though she felt far from certain. Over the next month, more articles appeared. Other soldiers came forward with their own concerns about operations in the theater. Congressional staffers started asking questions in oversight hearings. The story was getting bigger, moving beyond just the convoy incident to broader questions about command accountability and operational transparency. Sarah was transferred to a desk job, officially described as temporary reassignment for administrative purposes. Everyone knew what it really was, an attempt to sideline her and limit her access to operational information. She was interviewed multiple times by investigators looking into unauthorized disclosure of classified information, though they never found evidence that she had revealed anything that wasn't already public knowledge. Captain Hayes reached out to Sarah during this time, thanking her for bringing attention to the issues. Hayes had also been reassigned, moved to a training unit far from combat operations. Together, they had become known as the Convoy, though neither of them liked the term. 6 months after Sarah first reported her concerns, a congressional investigation was announced. The House Armed Services Committee would be conducting a full review of convoy operations, command communications, and the handling of intelligence in the theater. Several senior officers, including Colonel Davis, were called to testify. Sarah watched the hearings on television from her desk job assignment. Davis appeared uncomfortable under questioning, admitting to communication failures, but insisting that all decisions were made in good faith based on available information. Other witnesses about the complexity of operations in the region, the difficulty of distinguishing friend from foe, the challenges of modern warfare. No smoking gun emerged from the hearings, no definitive proof of corruption or deliberate betrayal. But the investigation did reveal significant problems with how intelligence was processed, how orders were communicated, and how command decisions were made and reviewed. Recommendations were issued for improving these systems, and several senior officers quietly retired or were reassigned to less prominent positions. It wasn't the clear vindication Sarah had hoped for, but it was something. The truth, or at least more of the truth, was now part of the public record. The questions she had raised were being taken seriously at the highest levels, and while she had paid a price for speaking out, she had also made a difference. A year after the convoy incident, Sarah received notification that she would not be promoted to major as scheduled. Her efficiency reports, once excellent, now contained subtle criticisms about judgment and ability to work within established systems. Her military career, once promising, was effectively over. She knew it, and so did everyone else. She could have fought the decision, filed appeals, made noise about retaliation for. But Sarah was tired. She had fought her fight, made her stand, and now she was ready to move on to whatever came next. She submitted her resignation from the military, effective in 6 months when her current service obligation ended. Who had supported her throughout the ordeal, wrote her a glowing recommendation letter for civilian employment. Hayes did the same. Several other pilots who respected what Sarah had done also offered their support. On her last day in uniform, Sarah stood at the flight line one more time, looking at the helicopters she had flown for so many years. She thought about all the missions, all the decisions, all the moments of fear and courage. She thought about her father and what he would say about everything that had happened. She decided he would be proud. She had done her duty, not just to follow orders, but to uphold the values that those orders were supposed to serve. She had stood up for truth and accountability, even when doing so cost her the career she loved. As she walked away from the flight line for the last time, Sarah felt at peace. The convoy incident would always be part of her story, a defining moment that changed the direction of her life. Command had said the convoy was untouchable, protected by diplomatic considerations and political calculations. But Captain Jennifer Hayes had destroyed 47 vehicles in one strike anyway, accomplishing a mission that was supposed to have been canceled. And in telling that story, in refusing to let the truth be buried, Sarah Mitchell had struck her own blow against the forces of complacency and cover-up. The convoy might have been untouchable in theory, but in practice, nothing was untouchable when people were willing to stand up for what was right. Sarah walked out through the base gates, leaving the military behind but taking with her the knowledge that she had made a difference. Somewhere, soldiers were safer because questions had been asked and changes had been made. That would have to be enough. New missions came down from command, and Sarah flew them all with her usual professionalism. "You need to come to the operations center right now," Emma said, her face pale.